Hi, everybody. So excited to have you back for another episode of Road to Lead, your podcast for all things succession planning. Today, we're super excited to have with us Miss Lourdes Zuniga. I will go ahead and turn it over and let Lourdes introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her leadership journey. Welcome, Lourdes.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Michelle, for inviting me. My name is Lourdes Zuniga, and I am the executive director and founder of the Financial Health Pathways. We are a nonprofit that does financial education and advocacy for low-income communities, particularly in Central Texas, and we work with communities to create systems that are inclusive and that are fair for particularly people of color and people that have very little to no access to financial services. I was born in Lima, Peru, and moved to the US 20 years ago. I volunteer a lot in different capacities for nonprofits, hospitals, FQHC facilities, and start in this wonderful journey to leadership when I was pretty young, but more
Yeah.
so in my adult life. I now lead a nonprofit and blessed to be a presidential leadership scholar this past year and also part of the
Congratulations.
American Express Leadership Academy. These are definitely life-changing opportunities that I was able to achieve, and I'm very proud of what I have done in my leadership and also opening those opportunities for people that look like me and you to see
Mhm.
that your dreams are actually pretty possible if you have a little bit of luck, a lot of hard work, and are strategic and intentional about what you do and you understand what your core values are.
There are a couple of reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast. Lourdes and I were American Express Fellows together, not in the same cohort, but we were both American Express Fellows. And we just had a gathering a couple of months ago, a couple of weeks ago. Is it? Weeks ago. It was my first time meeting her. She spoke around the idea of quiet leadership, that there are expectations of who leaders are, and generally people who are more introspective and who are more thoughtful and quiet in listening and absorbing. So all of the emotional intelligence that everybody now speaks about, those were not values for leaders. In terms of your leadership, how did you live the quiet, thoughtful, introspective leader in a space where that wasn't welcome and valued? And how do you see it now when everybody's starting to embrace that idea?
That's a very interesting question. And I think that you and I bonded over that concept. We celebrate the voices that are enthusiastic, passionate, and loud, as some people might say, and the ones that are the talkers, the ones that dominate the
Uh-huh.
and that's the kind of leadership we celebrate traditionally. But there is a great deal of leaders that are the opposite and that
Mm-hmm.
are quiet, that are intentional, that are introspective, and that they take their time to listen to a room of full of opinions and great opinions, but they process differently. They listen better. And I think that when they process after they listen to all the voices in the room, they formulate ideas and concepts that perhaps when you're always talking, you're not able to formulate. And not to say that the extrovert leaders are not effective, but there are strengths and weaknesses to every type of leadership. The strengths that we see in the introverts is that they take on information while everybody else is being active. So when they process that information, people tend to say to them, "Oh, you're so thoughtful. You're so wise." At least I get a lot of those, and I always in my head said, "Well, because I listen while everybody else is talking." And so it's really difficult to be a leader in spaces that quietness is not celebrated. It's also seen as a weakness. So
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes I get people trying to push me around, but then you have to be assertive. And believe me, I am an introvert, but I also get my point across when I want to. And so
Yeah.
you have to be determined to, if everybody's talking and you have the same thought, then I always think, why do I add to this? They already said it. So I just stay quiet. But if somebody is
Yes.
saying something that is wrong or something that really is not accurate, or things that really are not solving the issue we have at hand, and I have a
Mm-hmm.
different thought, then I'm going to add to this conversation accordingly. Again, like usually the dominants in the room are going to push the quiet people around. And
Hmm.
at that point, you kind of have to know what you pick your battles, right? And so for
Yeah.
me, it's been very useful to be an introvert in my strategy and how intentional I am. And that's why I think I have been successful at what I do. But in
Hmm.
the external, it doesn't necessarily, it's not easy to
Hmm.
be a quiet leader because, again, we are so used to that. The talkers are the leaders and we listen to them. And then the quiets, we see them as weak people. And sometimes
Hmm.
I personally, when I identify a quiet leader in a room, I tend to bring the attention to them. It's almost like
Yes.
that, we haven't heard from you. I don't want to put you on the spot, but would you mind elaborating on what you said earlier? Or if they haven't said anything, I would just say, what do you think? Because I feel like I
Hmm.
don't know if I'm understanding. So I prompt with a question. And that's my way of saying to the people that have already talked, let's
Yes.
listen to the people that haven't said anything. Sometimes it's just that awareness that sometimes we as leaders, we just get wrapped up in what we're saying and we forget that there is a room full of people. So for me, it's difficult, but I think that it comes to a point where I have to understand if we're not solving the problem, we're all just talking louder and louder and louder, then we have to reel it back to why are we here? Let's hear from everybody.
I absolutely love that you make space in the room for everybody because you miss out. And I think that is a qualification of a really great leader is the ability to get ideas and thoughts from everybody in the space because you could miss out on the thing that could propel your organization to another level simply because somebody didn't have the confidence or the ability to speak up for themselves and no one was paying attention enough to say, hey, we have not heard from this person here, and how can we bring them into the conversation in a way that's not domineering, in a way that's not putting them on the spot, but in a way that just opens up the floor, like everybody who has something to say has value. That was the immediate takeaway for me, that you create a space where everybody can be heard because what somebody has to say can absolutely change your organization and you might miss out on it. One of my favorite questions to ask of myself and to ask of others is, what are some things that you had to unlearn to become a more effective leader? There's always a lot of things you have to learn to be a more effective leader, but what are those things that for yourself you had to unlearn?
That I'm still unlearning, I would
It's
say.
still, yes, it's a process.
It's a process. There is no ending. I wish there was that easy. But one of the things that as an immigrant, I think I have worked very hard to prove my worth and myself in an environment where I was stereotyping to A, Y, or Z. As a Latina, I
Mhm.
think that I'm stereotyped as a cleaning person. And
Yeah.
so I think that I work really hard for people to see that I'm able to speak English. I do have an accent, yes. And when people label me like, not because of my intellect, but because of my accent, I always think that there is
Mhm.
a security behind that. And I take it like that. But it used to be very damaging to my confidence. And so
Mhm.
you you try to overcome that. And I think to this day, I still carry some of that depending on who is saying it. But I think that I work
Sure.
so hard to prove my worth, to
Mhm.
be more than that stereotype, that I am
Mhm.
able to be a CEO, I am able to be a founder, and I'm able to be successful in what I do. And I work so hard, I work long hours. And what I'm learning now is that, I can be effective if I am working 16-hour days for 7 days a week and years and years and years. And I think that's the trait of an entrepreneur, right? Like we work
Mhm.
hard, we say, we embrace the, like, let's grind it out, let's just, hustle.
Mhm.
It gets to a point when you go so far high and you think, am I living my life or am I just a slave of my own success?
Yeah, yeah.
To keep up with the expectations of people that are always looking like, what is she going to do now? Like, she already in this space, she already passed legislation, she's a presidential scholar. And you feel, not because
Mhm.
people expect that, but you feel people expect that from you. Like, what's
Yeah.
next? And I
Hmm.
to myself, and recently I've been reflecting a lot on this, is that, so what if I don't do anything? What if I just work normal hours? What if I don't feel like I'm saving the world? And if I don't wake up, at 5 a.m. one day to check my emails, will the world come to an end?
Will everything fall apart? Right.
And I think unlearning that idea that the world will not go on without me is one of the hardest things that I'm dealing with. I learned that the world will go on. So
Yeah.
I can actually take a weekend off. Work will wait for me until Monday, right? And so I think that that's one of those things where, yes, I do love what I do, and I have passion. And I think taking a day off is not a reflection on my lack of passion or commitment to my work. I think it's just to be intentional and to be and to take care of my own well-being so I can be productive on Monday. And
Hmm.
it's a concept that it sounds in theory really great and very easy to do, but in reality it's not. And I'm dealing
Yeah.
with that. And so I hope that someday I can just relax and be okay with having a weekend and watch a movie and not feel guilty about it.
I think it's the combination of entrepreneurial spirit. We share a similar background in terms of being immigrants. The idea that we are always working, and if you're not working, you're not being productive. The reason why you're here is to do better than your family did. Doing better, the next generation after you will do better, the next generation after that. I don't know about your kind of family background, but the idea of rest, my parents at least, and my grandparents, it's a privilege that they did not have to even think that rest was actually something that they deserve. Like they didn't need to earn rest, like they should just rest. And it's something that I find myself as well, that I'm like, oh, okay, you can sit down and not do anything. Like that's okay. Like the world is not gonna fall apart
The
smoothly.
quality of life, right? I think that
Yeah.
we often sacrifice quality of life because we think that success means be miserable. That's not true.
So as a founder ED and connecting the idea of rest and disconnecting from your organization sometimes, um, what does that look like kind of eventually in terms of like succession planning? Have you been thinking about it? Like where does your head go when you're like, at some point I'm going away from this organization, what happens next?
Well, I think that there's two things, and I was a consultant before, and I still do on occasion for nonprofits, and the difference between succession planning and like the loan process and also emergency succession.
Hmm.
One is when you're leaving and or you're thinking that okay, this when we part ways. But then the other one is like, what happens if I get sick? If something happens like so sudden that somebody has to know. So usually just building systems for me, that leaving like little pieces of uh, bread, like almost like a trail, and say, these are things, these are all the passwords. That's kind of like logistics, right? What are
Hmm.
all the processes usually on a checklist? And these are the things that um, will make the organization run, and having everything documented and available to some, because not everything can be available, but having a couple of people briefed on things that are necessary and are important to know, and people will figure it out. I mean, I did not have that blessing when I took the organization. um, I had nothing, so I learned the hard way how I had to read a lot of open documents that were empty, that were labeled
Yeah.
empty. And so you kind of realize, it's important to have some kind of structure and some kind of logistics or plans for
Hmm.
if the leader is not available. And also, when you're thinking of the long term, you have to set some goals, and a strategic planning is always important. What are the goals? I suggest 3 years, not five. I know most people do five, but I think that with ever changing world, five is just too much and too long. I revise this every year, so things change. During pandemic, we have some goals based on our strategic plan, and
Yes.
pandemic threw it all off. So you
Yeah.
have to be able to have a map and kind of blueprint to map road everything, but you also have to be flexible to, let's say we have another pandemic, how are we going to cope with this now that we're not able to do this? And so I think that it's important to have some kind of process, but also be open to the idea of what are the new challenges and what are the things that we need to concentrate our efforts. So for succession, I think that it's just important to have the immediate plan, but also to have a long-term plan, and to have someone, one or two people that you're always looking into your leadership and see, okay, so these are the people that I think will be, so whether they take on the organization as leaders or they assist the person that will bring in. It's as important to have a short-term plan for an emergency as it is to have a long-term. I know that a lot of people talk about the executive syndrome, that, you know, when you're a founder, you've been there too long, your entire life, and it's your baby and you don't want to let it go. But I'm actually the opposite. I'm one of those people, I'm a scaler. So I take organizations that are small and then I scale them. I'm one of those people that understands and realizes when I can no longer add anything to it. I as far as I can possibly take it, me as a person or as a leader, and then say, you know what, I think this project is ready for somebody else. I don't feel that the organization is an extension of me. I think that organizations will change over time from their infancy and will mature and will probably need different perspectives. So I think that it's recognizing that. I think that's also a type of leadership, recognizing that you no longer add value to it. And when that happens, I hope that leaders don't cling on to their organizations and just let them go and grow and be better and get a different perspective. It's also important to have that mentality and not to take something and make it so you that without you, it doesn't succeed. That is not a trait of a leader, I believe. Most people should take an inventory of the strengths and weaknesses that you bring to that organization and let your organization grow if eventually you no longer add value to it.
It's a very focused and mature way to look at it. That extension of you can sometimes be almost subconscious. You're not making the decision to say that I don't want this organization to succeed if I'm not the one running it, but then you're doing things where you're not bringing in your team on leadership decisions. You're not professionally developing your staff to help them grow. Like, all of those things are things that you're doing to undermine somebody else's ability to be able to lead without you realizing. I appreciate that you vocalize the fact that we do have to take a step back and say, am I still the right person to lead this organization today? And I feel like that's something you have to do constantly. Otherwise, you run the risk of not focus on meeting the mission that your organization was created to meet.
Yeah. So it's like children. You want them to succeed, they'll eventually get married, and you're not, you know, doing anything for that child anymore. It's the wife, right? So often just grab organizations, and it's so us that without us, there would be nothing. But what's the disservice there for an organization that could potentially lose funding if you leave, and you leave the organization in bad shape, or you make the organization all about you, and then if you have to retire or something happens to you, you want the organization to be successful. So thinking that it's you, probably not a good idea.
For FHP, what does it look like? Some practical steps in terms of thinking about succession planning. What does that look like internally for you?
We recently went through a rebranding. We were under a different name. Part of the work that I did as I was growing the organization was to add advocacy and awareness. Before, we used to be just content delivery and knowledge delivery. We believe that financial education and financial wellness does not just embrace knowledge. So we work at the intersection of finances and health. As part of the social determinants of health, financial education is an important component of financial health. So we recently rebranded the organization to Financial Health Pathways. And so succession plan, because we're a fairly new brand, we have in our strategic plan, but we recently went through this process. So infancy stages at the moment, but it is in our strategic plan, is to develop processes that will
Mm-hmm.
allow for the organization to lay the foundation for the upcoming years. And that means improving our processes of technology, because pandemic make us wake
Mm-hmm.
up to the idea that a lot of services need to be delivered virtually, and that actually gives us the ability to expand geographically. Planning for financial health pathways is something that, while we did have some processes with our previous brand, we're refining that process. And again, back to the question before, we try to make sure that we have those processes in place to a point that it's easy for someone to see what was done, what needs to happen,
Yes.
what does that look like. And if that
Mm-hmm.
person thinks that that is not necessarily the route they want to go, they can change, they can pivot. So you leave some structure, but you don't leave it so rigid that anyone coming in could not pivot, could not adjust it and be flexible about it. I think that that's for me. Like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you
Mm-hmm.
how I've done it, what I've seen being successful. And the
Mm-hmm.
things that might need some polishing and might need some more dedication or more exploration, if you wish.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone that comes in will make their own path. And that's what I advise new CEOs when they come to me for advice or mentorship, is like, you don't have to fill the shoes of your predecessor. You will take what they've done, but you will also find your own path to be successful, because you can't replace someone. You're replacing the title. I mean, you're taking that title, but you're not replacing anyone. You have to make your own journey. And so within the mission, you find your own footprint, you find your own way to lead the organization. And that's basically what I do. I just leave a roadmap. I think that I want to
Mm-hmm.
include some processes and maybe do more exploration in what technology looks like, because we've never done it. And I think once we
Okay.
get that, we will have a fairly uh, good roadmap and blueprint so that the organization can be, on track to success, just like we were the few years that we've been in the business.
I think you're the perfect person to speak to this question. So, succession planning is something that, as a sector, I don't think we do very well. We do emergency succession planning well. Well, we know that in emergencies, we need to have a succession plan, but I don't think we do long term succession planning very well. Well, you're not just thinking about who's going to lead the organization, you're looking at the health of the entire organization, where you're trying to scaffold. So, all of your staff, how do you move them each to different levels? Because once the person potentially identified who's going to take over, how is that person going to be supported? And how are they going to be able to support the rest of their staff if there's no growth plan for them? But we also know that spend the time that you need to professionally develop on top of all the work that you have and on top of the limited resources that come with just being nonprofits, that can be difficult. I am a firm believer that your money follows your values. I don't think that you can do a succession plan without really putting a stake in the ground and having a budget around it and really being thoughtful. And I don't know that the funders are thinking in the same way. So, how do you deal with the financial question around the budget planning, the actual monies that it requires for somebody to have the time that they need, for your organization to have the time that it needs, for your people to develop, for your people to get to a place where everybody's on a scaffolded path?
That's a good question. And your comment that we don't do in nonprofits a very good job at succession planning, not for emergencies, but the traditional one. I think that
Mm-hmm.
back to that comment I made about, you know, not willing to leave an organization. I think that we sometimes
Mm.
do it to ourselves, that we don't develop, don't have the money, or we don't make a priority to put that on the budget, because we don't. I mean, I don't know if in a it's not on purpose. I believe. I think it's just psychology that we are the leaders. And the
Mm-hmm.
idea of leaving, well, I remember being on a board and somebody said succession plan, and they're like, whoa, are they going to fire me? I said, well, why would you say that? Well,
Yeah.
they thinking of replacing me. They're not. These are things that need to happen. And so the idea
Yeah.
for EDs to think that succession planning means that they're going to fire is like, so we don't
Mm-hmm.
make that, we don't open that door because they're like, careful what you wish for because you're doing succession plan. They might look for your replacement. I'm like, those are insecurities we have, right? We carry those with us. But that again, to the detriment of the organization. Having a planned budget and involving people within your organization on all levels into this
Mm-hmm.
process is important. Making the organization financially healthy for the person
Mm-hmm.
coming in is also important. And having the idea that you have to educate funders. When I work in philanthropy with different funders, and I say we have to educate funders, they're like, "Whoa, what are you saying?" Well, you don't think they need to
Yeah.
be educated? They do.
Uh-huh.
And so we all need to be educated on what we don't know. I think educating funders, there are several issues that I try to always put at the front for them to kind of dig in. Succession
Mm-hmm.
planning is one, and funding advocacy. A lot of people don't want to fund that, and I know that there's
Mm-hmm.
like some issues around it, but I think that you have to also have those conversations with funders. Look, I'm about to retire, and this is a true issue that I'm glad that you're doing this for organizations, because we are entering 2 to 3 years. The next 2 to 3 years, we have a major departure of people that are retiring. They are in retirement age.
Mm-hmm.
So those people leave the workforce, and you
Yep.
have a that hasn't been developed, hasn't been mentored. Their organizations are on the verge of, just like mine, closed doors. My organization was
Um,
about to close doors when I took that on. I inherited an organization that was 60% of their budget was already burned underground, and it was a
wow.
miracle that I turned it around. So
Yeah.
to know that usually in these situations, it's people of color that are put in the situation almost set to fail because they inherit organizations that aren't developed, that aren't financially healthy, that aren't,
Mm-hmm.
that don't have processes. Then there comes the leaders of color, and then they said, "Oh, that person burned that organization." No, it was
That,
already. It's not
yeah.
developed, and we were
Uh-huh.
at 11 hour giving them life support and CPR,
Yep.
and there was nothing we could have done. So
Mm-hmm.
again, it's important for us to be able to identify leaders, to
Yep.
develop, to make sure that. And one thing that I took to heart this year was the ability to be in professional development, because yes, I am a leader, but that doesn't mean I have all the answers. I also need reflection time. I also need to fill
Yep.
my cup so I can be the best for the organization. So taking the time for that, most people will
Mm-hmm.
say, "Oh, she's traveling, she's doing all, having so much fun." No, I'm actually doing my job. I'm
Yeah.
developing myself so I can develop others, so I can
Yes.
actually set some expectations. So it's not time that I'm having fun, it's time that I'm working on things that will help the organization for years to come. And so just like I develop myself, the rest of the people, usually leaders, have a core group of leaders that need to be nurtured. If it's not you developing them, because you said it's hard because we have all these responsibilities, it just, you can meet quarterly and you can actually look
Mm-hmm.
for someone that you say, you know what, I feel like this person, this friend of mine, can be a great mentor for you on a consistent basis.
Mm-hmm.
I can check in with you as your boss, maybe each month, maybe each quarter, and just kind of check and to see where we are as a team.
Mm-hmm.
An ED gives you the possibility of networking with a lot of EDs, and you can always ask people and say, I have this great staff member that I can
Mm-hmm.
mentor because I'm so overwhelmed. You have more people on your crew, so you probably have a little bit of an extra hour to, and you can make those opportunities. You can look for opportunities that are free. There's a lot of networks out there that are free to
Mm-hmm.
color, that you can mentor people, you can find help for your team. So I think it's just being creative. The idea that
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to spend money on a lot of these things, it's not necessarily true. I think that yes, money is important, and you should look for a funder that will pay for professional development. I was blessed that I have experience doing that for me. And my
Mm-hmm.
Sandel Foundation. I'm very grateful to them. JP Morgan actually did an assessment of my organization and see what are the areas that we need. So there is a lot of funders that will do things for you to grow as an organization.
Mm-hmm.
Connecting those dots and connecting those people with your other employees and your staff members and see what are the ways that we can have a retreat, have a time where we can connect outside of work. I think it's as important as developing your strategic plan, as developing your succession plan, because if you don't have a motivated team to see the organization
Mm-hmm.
do a change, a drastic change in leadership, then you don't have anything that would be the foundation for success for the future. Human capital is pretty much probably the best asset along with your time.
You opened up something that I think is kind of quietly not spoken about. Sometimes it's difficult or maybe a little scary to open up your network to other people on your team. I don't know if it's the belief that maybe they'll go somewhere else, but I've never heard anyone say, why couldn't I introduce one of my team members to another ED, because I think there would be value in something that they could teach them. And if they were able to connect and meet, this could be mentored. I have been doing this only for like the last year, but I haven't heard anyone mention that. And I've been talking to EDs just in general because I like picking people's brains, and no one's mentioned that. There is almost an unspoken fear that if I show you how great this person is, then that person is gonna leave and go to another organization.
If they do, good for them.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
If
Yeah.
they can offer a better opportunity for a team member,
Mhm.
it's sad to see them go, but why do you want to keep someone that is not happy where they are? And it has nothing to do with you or the work they're doing for you. It might just
Yeah.
be they outgrown the organization. It's
Mhm.
like relationships. Maybe you just outgrown that person and then you move to the next. Again, the idea that you have to keep people in the dark, it's two-way street, right? That the grass is always greener. They might be promised something, and if that it doesn't work, you said, you know
Yeah.
what? If that's what you want to do, please do. And if it doesn't work out, you have a place here. I think opening those barriers helps more than it hurts an
Yeah.
organization and a person as a leader. I was followed after I left a different industry where I used to work in hotels. People will follow me to every property I work. And they were like,
Yeah.
I want to work for you because, like I like to have the flexibility of this and this and this. It kind of is a way of, I don't want to have you here if you're not happy. As a matter of fact, I actually will find opportunities where maybe you could be happy. And my
Yeah.
boss, you're crazy. We need staff. I'm like, let them go. I mean, they'll come back if they don't find the happiness they're looking for.
I do think that is part of the succession planning, that the reality is sometimes you could develop somebody into realizing that maybe this isn't the right path for them. And that is okay. You shouldn't not invest in them because you're worried that what if you invest the time or the money and they don't continue with your organization? That hurts more than it helps, like you're saying.
And experience makes you this way. When people ask me why I'm so open, it's because people weren't as open to me. I learned everything I know by watching people. People wouldn't want to teach me. They would actually like take me off spaces just because they didn't want me to look and to learn. But I'm a quick learner, if anything. I just look at things and systems. I taught myself how to develop so many technology pieces. I used to like
Yeah.
migrate medical records into new ones, and they're like, how did you learn that? I'm like, just watching and clicking in every software.
There's that introspection. Yes.
And again, I process information differently. When you've been so neglected and accessing to knowledge, then when you work for an organization where you're the one that can open those doors, then you actually said, you know what? Because I was neglected, I don't want anyone to feel this way. So I just open, if they want to know how to make the schedule, if they want to know how to do this, how to do that, please, you can sit down, here's how I do it. You can find a better way, but this is what's worked for me. You open those doors because, again, you, in your experience, if you didn't have that and you felt that you were neglected and not developed, then you always think, I don't want people to feel that way.
I wanted to come back around to something that you said as you were talking about the funding, which I thought was interesting. The idea that you go into funding relationships knowing that the funder has things to learn as much as you as a fundee might have things to learn. it's not true for every organization, but for our sector, and I've spoken to other EDs on this podcast about this, that some of our nonprofits enter the relationship with a funder from they're up here and we're down here,
top bottom,
as opposed to looking at it like it's a relationship. Like, we have an opportunity for you to do good, and we figured out a way to make sure that you can have impact, and you're coming with the funding, and together we're gonna do so much better for this world by the combination of our expertise and your funding. So very few people come into funding relationships as a relationship. So for you to say, you look at it, that they have something to learn and you're willing to teach them, I would love for you to just expand on that. I love that so much.
I always say things that people are thinking. I'm not a genius. I'm just repeating or saying what I'm thinking, but people don't say. Maybe the journalist part of me, I'm so opinionated. I'll give you an example. When I took this organization, I was so fortunate to find Experian. And the Experian brand, Carol in particular, the person I met, I have nothing to show. I had no outcomes. I did not pass legislation. I did not have a court program, a financial justice program that has waived over $500,000 in fines and fees. I did not have any of the accolades I have now. I was this ED that just took an organization and was finding a way to make a difference. And they put money on me. And what she said is, I'm investing in you. And I will never forget that. I would be forever grateful to Carol and Experian because they invest in me as a person. I had nothing to show them as investors. And to this day, we have a relationship as funder and fundee. And when we talk and we sit down, every year we go for lunch and talk about what we've done. And, they have featured FHP on their global annual report that goes to the world. I'm the only local organization they fund. The Experian brand has the strategies, they only fund national brands.
Wow.
So I'm the only local one funded by them. She does not ask me for all these sometimes cumbersome things that funders ask you. I'm so grateful to them for giving me the opportunity to do what I do and not have to worry about kissing rings, overwhelm myself with the level of investment they have with our organization is huge. The donations that we get are in various ranges, but their level is so high. It's actually our main funder. They don't ask me for much. Saying that I'm an organization of one, and being a one-person organization, I have managed to do a lot in changing systems, not just activities that sometimes we say those are outcomes, but they're activities, right? And so for me, that's quintessential what a positive funder-fundee relationship is. They understand my limitations, my capacity, and they see me as someone that, yes, every year we have these results. Can you imagine if we didn't invest in her and they listen?
Mm-hmm.
What are your goals for next year? Well, I have these things. I don't know, might be crazy. I'm thinking about this and this and this. And then they're like, okay. And so for me, that is the best example I can put it. Sometimes having these honest conversations, and I have these conversations with Carol in a way that, I always say, these are my limitations, but what do we do about this?
Mm-hmm.
That I wish I could do, but I can't. The ability for her to listen, take that in, and make it so easy for me to say, you know what? These are the things that we kind of have as a strategy, then let's work together on this. Same thing with, the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, St. David's Foundation, funders that I work for, quite some time already. And during pandemic, St. David's Foundation said, whatever grants we gave, use it the best way you can. You don't have to apply to abide by the grant. But it's all because we have these conversations, right? You pick up the phone, I with all my funders and said, these are the limitations. I can meet in person. How do I do classes? And it's not until you bring that up to them, they're like, oh. So then some will say, oh, well, we have to make it happen. Okay, I'll try. But then others will be like, well, what would be the solution? What would be best? And just the ability to, from your perspective as a leader, to provide those, because it's easy to criticize. I can criticize foundations all I want. But if I don't bring a solution to them, then I'm just part of the problem. When I say these are the limitations. And they said, what do you think will be the solution? How do you get around this? Then I say, I can do this, this, or this, or all of them. And I'm committed to use the money in a way that is significant and meaningful. It just can be this way because the grant said that it has to be this way, but we can meet.
Yeah.
Having that relationship with funders, it's important. And not calling them just when you have a request, and calling them when you say, you know what, I thought about this conversation we have, and I thought about this thing that you mentioned, and how can we leverage on this? So when you have that kind of relationship, you're able to not just improve your organization, but improve the lens a foundation or a donor sees the space and your organization by default. When we are so complicit and so afraid of bringing anything to their attention, funders actually want to know what's happening down in the grassroots space. They don't want to just be told what people think they want to hear. Funders are very intelligent people that might not have boots on the ground, but they want to know. And when they do find people and leaders that do tell them, these are the challenges. You're asking me for this, but you know what? It's not feasible. So I think that having an honest conversation of the true need, what needs to happen, it opens the ability for funders not to just fund you better, but fund the space in a significant way. And that's how you make all these equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives, because we were voicing this. There's lack of participation on boards, there's lack of participation in the workforce, in the space of EDs. We don't have enough leaders of color. So foundations start listening, they start creating these grants that were specifically to address the lack of diversity. So again, if it's not brought up by us that are in the trenches, who's going to tell them? So they want it really speaks to what leadership is, and not to what being complicit sometimes, because it serves me. If I said something that upsets them, they're not going to fund me. So I'm just not going to say it. Separate those two. You can actually be funded, but you can also bring issues. You are a leader at the end of the day. So you kind of have to be honest about the needs, honest about what is working and what is not. And funders actually appreciate that. And I have several examples of that. In my time with social impact, I've seen a trend of people that have a better grasp on things because we have those conversations with them. It's a win-win for everybody. Just the money gets spent in a more significant way, and you help the space, not just your organization, with different elements that maybe before they weren't spoken about. If you can open those lines of communication and that framework, you actually influence people in a way that makes the systems better, makes philanthropy better, and that's a win-win for the sector.
Your advocacy piece is what was coming up to my mind. You decided with financial health pathways that you were going to go into advocacy. And I think leadership, if you're approaching it from the fact that not only are you helping your organization, but you're changing the lens of the sector, that also divorces you from this fear that if I speak up, then potentially my organization gets hurt. But if you don't speak up, your organization gets hurt, and so does the entire sector where we're all working to make change. So I appreciate that you brought this advocacy piece into it, and sometimes feel like I'm just focusing on my organization, but really the change that you can potentially make goes so far beyond that.
The way I look at it, and I appreciate you saying that, is because when you've been in the space in the way I have, changing the way a court sees people that come with minor traffic offense. When you're able to change those systems, you earn social capital. And how do you spend your social capital? You spend it on issues that you feel passionate. And it's not just about my organization, it's about how do I make the landscape better? And so spending my social capital on things that matter, important to me, is a core value I have. I'm happy to spend that social capital, even if that makes me the unpopular person, because I know the end, the greater good is what matters to me, and not necessarily just the individual or the organization as it's just me. I think it's just about how you want to spend your social capital for the good things that you want to happen in this world.
Speaking of social capital, it wasn't a question that I was going to bring up, but you brought it up. I thought that it would be worth talking about. So we know that leaders of color, especially women of color, are, in terms of funding and being able to lead, that the funding that comes to organizations led by people of color, especially women of color, is a lot less than funding led by men of white men. One of the reasons is the lack of social capital, is the lack of access to those relationships, to those networks. As leaders are coming into this space now, what would you recommend in terms of building those critical relationships that will help them be in a space where they can help use their social capital or grow their social capital so that they could use it for the greater good?
That's a great question. I don't know what the recipe would be for success in any level. I can only speak to what has worked for me. I've been one to be open to all points of view. I think in a world that is so divisive and so polarized, we tend to hang out around the people that just think like us and agree with us. And I am not one of those people. I'm someone that needs a lot of stimulation, like emotional, and I need my brain to be stimulated at all times. And
Yeah.
good or for bad, I think that makes me someone that is open. I always have people, even people of color, saying, "Why are you hanging out with so many white people?" I would say, "Why not? Why,
Yeah.
why, why would I not be friends with them? Because you're like us." Well, just because I'm Latina doesn't mean that I will hang out with just Latinos. So just because I'm a woman of color doesn't mean that I'm just going to hang out with. I want to know how they feel about certain issues. I have good friends, like from all over the world. That mentality of being open to listen, not to agree,
Yeah.
but to listen to all sides, and to at the end of the day. And I have a friend that is in the other end of ideology from me, at the other end, where we couldn't be farther. And
Yeah.
and I would say, at the end of the day, I love you as a friend. And I hope that our disagreements do not destroy that friendship.
Yeah.
So I think that the ability to understand and listen to all points of view makes you have a network of people that might not agree with you on everything you're saying, but they respect you. And if they respect you and they see that you're doing good things with an organization, then they're like, I know politically we cannot be more different, but I like what you're doing, helping people understand finances, because that's a big issue. So here is a donation. I actually have a lot of donors that, not that I go around talking about my political views, but they are. I can tell that they're in a different box, and
Yeah.
they are donors, and they're like, I love the way you do things. Like you don't just give them money. You want them to learn. You want them to know more. You want them to, excel with the things that we have in the playground. There is no other way around it. So it's not just is like being able to give them the knowledge they need to fend for themselves in the future. And so I think that when people respect you, they are more inclined to support, if it's not with money, at least with connections. And I find that very something that has worked for me is that I just try to see silver linings on all perspectives. I like to be someone that is open and inclusive. I might not like what you're saying, but I'm going to listen to you with respect and tell you respectfully how I disagree with you. That's something that not a lot of people can do. Then the other thing is, I'm not a social person. So you would think that a lot of people said, you raise so much money, I'm sure you're like parties and parties and parties. Oh God, no, I'm just not that person. Very intentional with who I reach out to. And I think that spending my time on things that, networking is an amazing tool for fundraising. Absolutely. There's no question about it. For some of us, it's a little bit harder when you're an introvert, because you go out and there's a limit of how many times you can go out. And I think women of color also have this limitation of an appearance. I mentor a young lady that said, I can't be in those places because I don't have an outfit for every time that I go out.
For every, right? Yeah.
I want to be the same outfit. And, I it's so heartbreaking that, people feel that way,
Mhm.
like you're in high school all over again. And I always say, you don't have to. That will fade away in 3 seconds. It takes some confidence. So you have as a mentor to work on a lot of the confidence issues. If you think about how many times people look at your shoes, you'll be shocked. No one looks at your shoes. People are looking at your face and what you're saying. People really
Yeah.
don't talk
Yeah.
about the outfit. And so you kind of
Mhm.
have to put things like in a frame where they understand that what the substance is more important. I said, listen,
Mhm.
as long as you have a blazer and a pair of trousers, like you don't have to.
Mhm.
There's people that wear a uniform, and that's for a reason. You can just spend, money at Goodwill with like get a blazer and show up to those parties. But I think networking is one thing that it might come second nature for some, but it might not for some people.
Yeah.
Cannot be in those spaces for diverse reasons, some materialistic and some confidence. So I think
Mhm.
that the ability to network, even not just in the sense of going to social activities, but to network like with phone calls and maybe just more intentional, I think is key.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
yes, we still have a long way to create more access for women of color in places where there is a lot of power, particularly
Mhm.
monetary power. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that I work very intentionally of. It's not just going to a place, a crowded place, it's to go to
Yeah.
a crowded place where all these money people are.
Mhm.
We have a long way to go in that space, and I think that is something that I feel very passionate about, because not everybody has access to those connections of powerful people. So how do we work in creating a better system where we can find all these people in one room and bring a bunch of women of color that they can actually pitch their organizations and their ideas. And there is some movements nowadays, but I think that we're still not enough of those initiatives. Hopefully, someday we can create something like that for women of color that really are underfunded, giving them the tools, not to just give them the money, but giving them the ability to be mentored, to have financial support, and to have everything they need to succeed. I think it's important if we want these upcoming years to be successful for the social impact. As a matter of fact, social impact spaces have been picking up the slack for government. So it is in the best interest of everybody to support women of color, to support nonprofits in the social impact space.
I'll speak from my observation of the field, different opportunities that I've seen offered. There's a lot of training on leadership skills, on the professional development of like things that you're like, but why wouldn't you think that I'm at that space? Because if you looked at somebody who's my peer who wasn't a person of color, you wouldn't have offered them the same thing. Sometimes for people of color, there isn't the we're bringing you in where you can be pitching your organization for funding. It's more, we're going to give you this opportunity to develop you as a leader. And it's going to be how to be a leader in the way that the world sees leadership. I just wanted to differentiate. There's opportunities that are intentional with helping you build relationships, helping you build connections. But then there are a lot of opportunities that are presented as that, but it's really, we don't think that you, as a person of color, know how to be a leader enough that we have to teach you.
Yeah, there is a study, I can't remember from who I read it recently, where it says that investors will ask a white man
Mm-hmm.
when they're looking for an investment. The questions will be so different from women of color. If a lady goes to pitch to an investor, the questions are like, you have to prove that this will work. Whereas men, particularly white men, are like, oh, it's not even a question. They don't have to prove anything. They would just
You
say,
don't have to prove it. Yes.
they would just say,
Mm-hmm.
with the money, I'll do this. And then
Mm-hmm.
with women, it's more of, how are you going to do it?
Yeah.
But you see that all these challenges around, and you still have to answer all that, because for women, is they have to prove that they have it all
Mm-hmm.
figured out. Where men is just like, an idea I have, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I will make it happen. And they're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, here's the money. For women of color, even more
Mm-hmm.
difficult. Just like you said, you go into a room thinking you're going to get funding, but then they
Mm-hmm.
condescendingly said, we're going to give you someone so you can be up to par. To me, so many times where I feel like, and I walk away from those spaces. I mean, there is a point in time where you have to have integrity and self-confidence for yourself and for your organization. And that's not what I was expecting. Thank you. I'm sure
Yeah.
someone will be thrilled to get the ballot. Inflation. So I don't know if what more can I do to prove that I'm a leader, but you don't say it like that, but you still kind of have some dignity, and you have to walk away from some spaces. So most people will say, are you crazy? You close the door on that. And yeah, if they don't want to give it to me in the terms of an agreement, then I don't want
in the same way that you would with somebody else without having to prove it. Yes.
There is money, and there is, I don't even know what to call it, but I don't want money just for money. I want them to believe in the organization.
It's trust. It really, at the end of the day, it's trust that I can lead this organization, that the people that I'm surrounded with, we can do this work that we're coming to pitch this idea to you for.
Not only that I can, but I have been leading.
And yes, absolutely.
And so when people said, we will give you this for you to be developed. Well, let me talk about our accomplishments. So then it's clear that I am not hoping to do this. I have been doing. So I always correct people when they said something like that. I work a lot on communications because that's my major. And one thing I always advise people that are doing speaking engagements is to inflections of voice. And I said, well, I have been doing that. This is what we've done. And so you get the people that their parents create this consulting firm and gave them the title of CEO. There are others that have worked really hard to get it. Live experience, work experience, and everything that you come with at a table that you're negotiating, you have to know your worth. Don't be afraid of expecting the respect that you deserve and clarifying for people that are trying to be condescending. I have never shied away from things like that just because it takes, an incredible amount of my energy to listen to those conversations where I'm being kind of like pushed down. And I smile and I say, but let me explain you why I think that was not an accurate statement of my leadership career. This is where I am, and this is what I can do if we put fuel into this fire. Understanding that sometimes funders or people that are investing will take offense. They won't say it, but they will. And others will say, you know what? I have actually that happened to me once or twice where they said, I apologize. I didn't mean to be condescending. I said, well, it came off that way, but I understand that maybe you weren't aware of it. But people that are starting in their careers and they have nothing to prove, I was one of them years ago. But I'm not there anymore. Setting those boundaries of how much you're going to let them dictate who you are, and when do you draw the line and say, let me correct you here. I know that you might not know this about me, but this is who I am. And I think that as women of color, we don't have that confidence. From my own experience, there was a time that I was not comfortable saying things like that. And it just kind of takes time to practice and master that and get more confident about things. And I think that, it's necessary to tell young women that they're going to treat you how you let them treat you. Sometimes you have to be assertive and you have to send that message that I can't tell your story. It's your story. So you're the one that tells that story because it's yours.
Well, that is an amazing way to end. Any parting thoughts that you would like to leave with the audience before we close out?
Well, I just want to thank you for the work that you are doing. I think that you have been very instrumental to a lot of women of color that are listening to the podcast and are expecting great success. But with that, there's always a level of mentorship that is personal, but it's also from these type of initiatives like this podcast and your leadership in general, knowing that women of color need more resources than we can imagine. And you doing your part to provide those resources for women of color is very inspiring. And I'm very proud that we connected at the American Express Summit in DC. And just to all women out there and women of color and social impact people. I never thought I would be meeting former presidents. I came here 20 years ago and my first job was at a restaurant cleaning seafood. And I never thought this will happen to me, but hard
Mhm.
work and humility took me this route. And I think that it's just a lesson for me to learn that, you believe in your dreams and believe in yourself, and then things can happen.
Mhm. Lourdes, thank you so much. I do appreciate everything that you shared with us today and just your ability to be open and candid about your leadership journey and help others see how that can connect to their own journey. Because I think there are nuggets that people can take away from this. So I appreciate you making the time. You're absolutely welcome back here at any time, whether it's with financial health pathways, or I'm sure, I know you said that you're going to take time to relax, but I'm sure there's going to be another organization that you're going to eventually find again. So you're welcome at any given time, whatever your next journey is. So thank you again for joining us.
No,
All
thank you.
right.